we're going to get started by talking about rural crime. So I'm going to ask Gavin, the Chief Constable, if he could talk to us a bit about rural crime, because it is something that comes up an awful lot when I speak to residents. And I wonder, Gavin, if you could just give us an update on what the force has been doing.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good morning, everybody. On rural crime, I'm going to hand over to Deputy Chief Constable to update on this item, who attended our most recent joint agency partnership group with members of the rural crime community, and he can give you an update from the team as well.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, so rural crime is an area that that we've invested in terms of resources over the last couple of years, and I was pleased that that was recognised when I met with a number of association representatives and landowners recently. The main issues that were highlighted then and are supported by the data that we have that they raised, there'd been a spate of thefts of GPS systems from tractors, and of course they're very expensive and they render the tractor effectively out of action, so have a massive impact on the farmers who lost those. And we have an operation called Operation Walrus that is targeting those, and the thieves that are doing that, they are organised, and it's difficult to protect the areas because, of course, they're quite isolated. But we have seen a reduction in those since a key arrest has been made, and we've been working with a number of other forces on that. One of the other things that has been a real concern is livestock worrying. And the third area of concern has been in relation to poaching. And poaching is something we've done a bit of work with our control room staff, particularly following actually that particular meeting, because it's when you look at the sentencing powers around poaching, they're not always particularly significant. In fact, we had a recent case in East Surrey where we successfully convicted a man of poaching, and it was quite interesting. The defence put up was that by the defence lister, this is something that wealthy people do. This is just somebody who isn't wealthy who's doing it. And I'm pleased to say, despite that defence, they were convicted, but they received £100 fine and £80 costs. And some confiscation of some of the equipment they were using. So we were disappointed with the sentencing there, that we don't see that as a significant deterrent. And it's particularly concerning poaching because when landowners do come across the poachers, they can sometimes be quite aggressive, and of course they often have dogs with them and sometimes weapons that they're using to undertake the poaching. So we recognise our response has got to be really good and quick, and that hasn't always been the case. Sometimes it's been call taker has identified it as a poaching issue and not looked at the isolation, the vulnerability, some of the wider issues, the perhaps potential organised criminality. So that's something that we're working hard to improve our response on. But in terms of who we have working on rural crime, we have a number of specific staff. We have police community support officer on each borough, and you can see them out and about in rural communities because they have green epaulets on, unlike the normal blue ones that police community support officers have. They have enhanced training and really good links into local organisations and networks. And then we have 2 and soon to be 3 full-time police officers who work entirely on rural crime. Is there anything specifically, Commissioner, you wanted me to focus on?
I think that's incredibly helpful, actually. I think the public will be reassured. You say that we've got 2, soon to be 3. When do we expect the third to be in place?
So that's being there's a meeting in March to look at resourcing and planning, where we're hoping to be able to put an advert out and then recruit somebody into that role. The reason it hasn't happened yet is because although we've identified a need for the post, we've been recruiting like mad, as you know, Commissioner. We've had an uplift of police officers, which has been really welcome, and a number of new routes into policing. But those routes in do take quite a lot of time to get officers fully trained up. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're still able to respond effectively and quickly to emergency calls before advertising jobs and moving officers probably off one of those teams to become a full-time rural officer. So that's led to a bit of a delay, but I expect them to be in post certainly by the summer.
Okay, that's really comforting. One of the things, of course, that people will know across the county is that Surrey is a really varied county. We've got parts which are particularly those closest to London, which feel much more urban, and we've got parts of the county which are very rural. The public are always interested and are always, I know, really, really keen to help and support in any way that they can. What would you say to the public in terms of how they can support their rural communities and make sure that we're all keeping everybody safe?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So what I'd say is please do tell us, even if it's minor within rural areas, but equally if there are suspicious behaviour, please tell us. I think all too often there's a feeling amongst members of the public that actually we wouldn't be that interested, or unless somebody is seen actually committing a crime, they shouldn't call us. But intelligence is our lifeblood, really, and the intelligence and information helps us firstly understand where potential hotspots are, but it also helps us join the dots with series of crimes. And of course, that person making the phone call won't know what else we might know about that vehicle, that person, that area. So it's enormously helpful, and I'd encourage them to let us know. It really isn't a bother. Even if we don't need to send an officer or community support officer at the time, we will log it, and it forms part of our understanding of what's going on in that particular area. And some of our most successful collars of some of the organised and habitual criminals have been from small pieces of information that have come from members of the public. So it would just be to encourage them to let us know, and not always on the telephone. We now have more contact from members of the public via our digital services, and you can do that at your leisure. You don't have to stay hanging on at all. Although we're pretty proud of our record of answering the phone fairly quickly in Surrey, it means that you don't need to worry about that. You can do it at your leisure, and we've got something in writing from you. And you don't have to give your name either. There is Crime Stoppers, etc. as well. If you want to give us some anonymous information, we'd welcome that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that update. Really appreciate it. And to everybody who is watching, don't forget that you can always view the latest performance report from this meeting or find out any other information about the work that we do from the website, which is surrey-pcc.gov.uk. Thank you very much for that update. Much appreciated. We're going to move on now to looking at the performance report from the force, and we're going to start with something which I know is very topical, and I've already had some comments in from the public this morning around. There was a story in the Times today looking at some of the official stats that were released last Thursday. So, Chief Constable, if I could ask you specifically about some of these solved outcome numbers and rates, and specifically in relation to burglary, which I know that people are really worried about. And unfortunately, according to the Times, Surrey is not doing very well. I wonder if you could tell us what plans are in place to improve it, and how we can give the public a bit more confidence that Surrey Police really are working very hard to fix this problem.
Yeah, good morning, Commissioner. Thank you. And yes, there's been quite a bit in the media recently about crime figures and crime solve rates. So perhaps just set that in a little bit of context first of all. So there are three things that you may see reported in the media, and indeed if you look at the public performance report from today that will give an outline of. So there's police recorded crime statistics, which then feed into the Office for National Statistics, or sometimes the ONS statistics that people talk about. And then there's also the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which is, as it sounds, a survey measure of people's experiences of crime. And sometimes that gives them different stats, but hence different recording method. The first thing to say is that Surrey Police remain the fourth safest county in England and Wales and the safest county in the southeast. And in terms of residential burglary, that decreased nationally by 19% over the last 12 months. But in Surrey, we saw a 35% decrease in burglary. So it's some of the lowest levels of burglary that I've ever seen in my almost 30 years of service. So pleased to say that it is a safe place. However, as your question outlined, we've got an awful lot of work to do in terms of solving more crime for our communities. So in the last year, we solved 74 fewer burglary offences than previously. Which results in a very low solve rate for Surrey of about 3.5%, which of course is nowhere near what we would want to do for our communities. There are a few reasons behind this drop off, and of course we will see when we go into later parts of the performance report that this drop off on solving crime is something that is a challenge to police services nationally and certainly to here in Surrey. But specifically on burglary, some of the reasons why. The way that we collect forensic and digital evidence now is changing. Burglary offenders are very smart at not leaving a trace behind. One of the ways that they do sometimes leave a trace is a digital footprint rather than a physical forensic footprint. On the physical forensic side, that's very well regulated and soon to be accredited now, and we've received favourable reports from the regulator on our progress on that. And we have recently, on the digital side, set up a digital investigation support unit. So this is a team of highly skilled people who are able to help investigators recover any digital evidence that might be associated with that crime offence. So, for example, if a vehicle is stolen as part of that burglary, then download from the electronics of the vehicle as to what investigative opportunities that might clear up. So a lot more that we've got to do on digital forensics. We also know that during the pandemic that one of our successful routes for burglary detections is to talk to those that we have arrested and imprisoned for burglaries and do what we call prison interviews, prison clear-ups. Sometimes you might see it reported as. Of course, none of that has been able to happen during the pandemic because we've not been able to get into the prisons during that time. I guess the other thing to recognise is that in these statistics, residential burglary does include sheds. So these are not always break-ins to people's homes that we're talking about. It's to sheds and outbuildings as well. That's a common feature of the offending across Surrey. And one of the things that we sometimes rely upon for these investigations is to be able to look at series and patterns and trends. Because the numbers have been very low in comparison to what we've seen before, sometimes those trends and series are not easy to spot in the intelligence analysis. They appear as sort of, you could argue, sort of random occurrences. I mean, we do sometimes pick out series and trends. Often it's those series and trends that then lead us to the identification of offenders through use of automatic number plate recognition, patterns of vehicle movements, as the deputy was saying on the rural crime, reports of suspicious activity that come into us, and that will give us that initial lead. So identifying those series has been a little bit harder during the pandemic. Just a few things on what we're doing to try and tackle these issues. So we've launched a force-wide initiative called Operation Falcon. That's a big part of our investigation improvement programme. Involves very close scrutiny of the investigative standards on offences, some principles that we're asking the investigators to follow. We've recently introduced in November of last year a prison investigation team in custody to provide more rigorous custody investigation procedures with specialist teams that will be rotated through there to get their skills up. We're running some focus group activity with investigators to find out from their perspective what their obstacles to solving more crime are. And we've also volunteered to be part of two national studies conducted by the Home Office, who of course are interested in what's happening nationally on this issue. So there's some specific group work looking at the blockages in the criminal justice system, which we're involved in, and why matters are not progressing through Crown Prosecution Service and into the court system. And we're also doing some activity-based analysis with another 8 forces nationally to look down at the sort of fine detail of what the police activities are and whether they prove successful or not in clearing up work. So we recognise there's a lot to do. We recognise that it's not giving our communities the service they absolutely deserve in terms of solving more crime, but just set in the context that it is still one of the safest counties in England and Wales, and we have seen a much bigger decrease in burglary than the national statistics as well. I think yes, thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And the context is, of course, incredibly useful. But of course, what the public will say is, what about them? What about if they are burgled and somebody comes into their home or their shed or their garage? And whilst the statistics are helpful, and I think we can all understand that they do help to put things in context, it doesn't help an individual resident. So what would you say to an individual resident who has been burgled and they dial 999 or they dial 101? What is going to happen for them?
So we will attend. So we will attend residential burglaries, of course, and burglary is one of those offences that is almost universally reported to us. So we don't see a drop off in burglary reporting. The only times that burglaries sometimes are not reported to police is when it's a burglary between rival criminal gangs. So, for example, if they're stealing commodities or cash from each other, then sometimes they're not reported to us. But generally, residential burglaries are fully reported to us. So please do keep doing that. You can expect a good response. We will survey you for your views on how we've quickly we've responded, what the quality of service is that you get when you get there, whether we keep you updated, whether you think the action we've taken has been effective or not. We do that via a text message survey, and the views that you give us are fed back to the individual investigators, so they will get your feedback on whether you feel that they've given you a good service or not. Typically in those satisfaction measures, we see low to mid 60% satisfaction. Clearly room for improvement in that. The areas where our communities tell us that they would like us to do better is in keeping them informed on the progress of investigations and in the practical action that's taken. And for that, it's exactly what we've been talking about. People want to see the offenders being brought to justice for the offences that they commit, and where that doesn't happen, clearly that's going to hit the satisfaction score. So you can expect a really good standard of service for us at the scene to follow those investigative leads. And my colleagues want nothing more to be able to clear up these crimes and keep the county safe. In fact, I was just discussing with the deputy this morning that we're at an unusual period in policing, in that all through my service, the volume of burglary, so the amount of burglary going on in an area, is normally correlated with whether or not you're being successful in securing offenders and locking them up. So if you identify the right offenders and get them in prison, generally your burglary rate goes down. We've broken that trend in the pandemic, so burglary rate is down significantly, but so is the volume of clear up. I've never seen that before in my career. So this is it's a real challenge for us, but one that we're determined to do much better at.
That's good, yeah. And we know that, of course, we have seen problems with the criminal justice system and court backlogs, which is affecting everybody. We all recognise that during the pandemic, obviously, burglary went down massively across the country. And it's not a huge surprise that it went down even more in Surrey, given how many residents of Surrey commute into London normally and therefore have been able to work from home. With the country largely now going back to offices and going back to work, there will obviously be more empty properties in Surrey. And so is it reasonable, first of all, to expect the burglary rate to rise, and secondly, are Surrey Police resourced and equipped in order to deal with that rise?
So we would expect some increase. We've already had some recent arrests of foreign national offenders, which those that have tuned into these performance meetings in years gone by will know 3 or 4 years ago we had a significant series throughout the southeast from foreign national offenders, where the proceeds of the burglary were making their way back overseas. That led to a big joint operation with police forces throughout the southeast and our colleagues in London as well. We've had some arrests recently, again, of a similar sort of series where organised criminals target particular postcode areas. So we would expect offences like that to increase, and that's where we work heavily on the intelligence and that and digital investigation that I mentioned, automatic number plate recognition and so on. In local boroughs and districts, I know our borough and district commanders have been doing lots of preventative work as well. So commend what's been happening over on Surrey Heath, for example. Alec James, the inspector over there, did a big problem-solving initiative on burglary with some real practical helps and tips. So For example, having a bin buddy. So we know that burglaries can be correlated with people not taking their bins back in. Very simple thing. Get yourself a bin buddy. Make sure you've got a neighbour if you're not going to be back that's going to take your bin back in for you. Lighting and movement in the house, all really important. In my home, I have an automated lighting system. Not very expensive now to be able to install those things. Can switch lighting off on a sort of random pattern, make the house look occupied if I'm not there. If you can afford it, get yourself a decent alarm that's serviced annually. That will reduce your insurance premium as well if you do that. All of those things really do help.
That's great, Chief Constable, thank you. I'm going to move on now to another issue that is also within the performance report, and something that's brought up with me when I speak to residents, whether it's at parish council meetings or out on doorsteps. And I think it may well be slightly a perception issue, and I wonder if you could talk about it, which is knife crime in Surrey.
Yes, of course. So maybe if I just set knife crime in the context of overall violence. So in violent reporting, there is much of our violence is people might find it surprising that it doesn't involve any injury. So violent crime as a category that's recorded, much of that does not involve injury. But of course, you would expect us to look very closely at those violent offences that do involve injury. So going back to those Office for National Statistics measures that we were talking about earlier, the violent crime to September of last year decreased nationally by 3%. In Surrey, we recorded a 6% decrease. And in Surrey, we have the lowest levels of serious violence with injury nationally. The second lowest nationally and the lowest within the southeast. So in terms of overall levels of serious violence, Surrey is a very safe county to live in. On knife crime, we were down on knife crime last year. We don't see a lot of knife crime offences in Surrey, so we were down by 44 offences. So we're talking just a few tens of numbers that we're down on, and our outcome rate, so the amount of knife crime that we clear up, is currently standing at about 19.5%. So one in 5 knife crimes we're clearing up. We've done an awful lot of work on knife crime with colleagues in County Council and elsewhere to try and reduce violence. I think you can see from those figures that we're starting to have some success on that. And just before the pandemic, there was a fantastic bit of work done by one of our intelligence analysts who looked at the different categories of knife crime and the different reasons that people were carrying knives. That's led to a lot of preventative work in schools, a lot of educational work. One of our detective superintendents did a master's degree study on how to influence the peer group of knife crime offenders to deter them from knife crime as well. So lots of great activity going on across the county. There is sometimes we hear from young people that the reason that they carry knives is because they feel unsafe and they need it for protection. If you carry a knife, you're increasing the risk to yourself. And it's one of the reasons in Surrey that I took the decision that we do not advertise knife crime seizures on social media. We do not sort of add to the fear that young people might see, because the overall context for Surrey is it's a very safe place to be. Now, we're not complacent, because we do see knife crime attacks, particularly associated with drug-related criminality and county lines activity. And on that front, we work very closely with a central metropolitan police operation and a specialist team that we have in Surrey to take out those county lines dealers. And when we take out those lines, which we've done very, very successfully, we've taken tens of county lines out of circulation during the pandemic, seen good national recognition for the work that we've done here. And when you take out those county lines, you automatically reduce the serious violence that's associated with them. So we do work very hard at that, because that's one high risk area where we do see knife crime attacks.
That's really encouraging, Chief Constable. Thank you. And I'm sure that residents across Surrey will be really encouraged by the work that's going on, and also in particular how safe Surrey is, especially regarding knife crime. I want to move on to road casualties. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, we were all stuck at home, or a lot of us were, and our cars weren't being used very much. We know the roads were much quieter, and so we saw collisions coming down. As I said earlier, of course, that's going to now start increasing. What action is being taken, first of all, and when will we have a dedicated resource to tackle what we know are the 5 biggest causes of collisions? And what message would you like to give to the public regarding road safety?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So, of course, in Surrey, we do have a section of Europe's busiest motorway network with the M23, the M25, the M3, and some significant A roads as well. Those roads, we work very closely with highways on to keep as safe as possible. We do see serious collisions on that network, but the area where sadly we see loss of life is often on our rural road network, which can be much more dangerous in combination, as you say, with those fatal 5 factors. So a few things that we do in prevention terms. Really, really proud of the work that's led by Surrey Fire and Rescue Service on a campaign called Safe Drive, Stay Alive, which has been running for I think a decade now, and that gets an educational programme to all new drivers across the county, and we have seen a direct correlation between that programme of work and the number of our young people that are killed on the roads. Sadly, we still see it, but it's a fantastic programme that I would encourage. If there's any parents of young drivers watching this now and you don't know that your 6th former has had that programme, please do speak to the school and please do get them to watch that content. There's some fantastic online content available on YouTube as well if you look for Surrey Safe Drive, Stay Alive. From an operational point of view, of course, we have an extensive safety camera partnership network. I visited them just early into the new year to award a long service award to one of the colleagues that leads that unit there. And that team do around about 100,000 prosecutions for speed and camera offences across the year. So we sometimes get letters into my office, I'm sure you do, Commissioner, to say, what are the police doing about speeding? Well, around about 100,000 prosecutions a year is what we're doing on speeding. And the team are now very sophisticated, able to look at for example, people that run under the red X's on motorways and enforce that, because that's very dangerous to colleagues who might be at the scene of an accident, attending to that, or at an obstruction on the motorway. So please do pay attention to those red X's. We do prosecute those now because it's really dangerous. The Fatal 5 team were already up and running with. In fact, I met the sergeant on the visit that I did. So they're going to specifically tackle those high risk issues and do that enforcement activity. I'm sure those that have tuned into these sort of meetings in the past or to some of our social media feeds will see some of the innovative work that we also do, prosecuting people using mobile phones, for example, whilst driving. Or those points of inattention that can lead to collisions. On that Fatal 5 team, as I say, there's a sergeant in there, and it's got 6 police constables, and it'll be fully staffed later this year. Just a few statistics on it to sort of put it into context. So looking to November, the rolling 12 months to November of last year, we look at 2 things, what we call killed or seriously injured collisions and killed or seriously injured casualties. So on the collisions, we saw 589, which was pretty much what it was the previous year, an increase of just 3, so very, very similar numbers. And on casualties, 640. The previous year had been 626. Now, it's really important when talking about numbers like that just to think of the human tragedy that lies behind them. A serious injury is what it sounds like. These can be devastating injuries that can change the course of people's lives. And of course, within those figures are fatalities as well. So we will be working hard with that new team, and of course, all of our existing roads policing provision and our armed response vehicles are often out on the major road networks as well to tackle those causes that lead to these collisions.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. That's good to hear. And as you say, we must remember in Surrey that we have one of the most dangerous and busiest stretches of motorway in Europe. Moving on to the last issue in the performance report, I want to talk to you about 101 answering, which, as we know, has been a real struggle. The average wait time now is nearly 5 minutes, although, of course, an awful lot of people will have to wait an awful lot longer than that. There have been difficulties, obviously, around the contact centre, around staffing, and in particular with COVID. But what can the force do? What are the force doing to ensure that this figure improves?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. This is one of the things that we pay very, very close attention to. So, again, just a little bit of context on if you call us on 999, then you can expect a very prompt response. And our figures on 999 are very consistent to get to those really serious issues and issues in progress very quickly. Our 101 is our non-emergency number. So this is if you're contacting us with a sort of routine matter. So often there is a wait, but of course we don't want there to be a wait that discourages you reporting, and we like to try and to sort of keep that within a minute or two, because we know that people will drop off. So we've seen an increase in the time. A few factors leading up to that. So as you mentioned, during the pandemic, we've had to separate our contact handlers into different locations to avoid the risk of any infection spreading throughout what is just a big office, a big open plan office. So we've moved between different locations to try and reduce the risk and keep that resilience up. Of course, we have, like every other organisation, seen COVID infections and seen our resilience knocked at points during the pandemic. I'm pleased to report that that's now coming back down to the levels that we would normally see for any winter pressures. So whereas this time last year we were approaching a 15% abstraction rate, that's a lot of people. We're now between 5 and 7% on any given day. So with that staffing resilience, I'm confident that we will start to see some improvement in those wait times. And the other thing that we're looking to get back to normal on just as soon as we can, and of course the guidelines are reviewed regularly with the national guidance from government, but also the work that we do with the health and safety executive is being able to get back together in the same location, because that just gives us a natural resilience of having the team together. One of the other things that's changed some of the performance, and this was a conscious decision on the part of the force, was that in the midst of the pandemic, we introduced a digital 101 service, so an ability to report to us online through a chat function on the website or through any of our social media channels. It doesn't matter which one. It just comes in as a text conversation with the operator on the other end. So these are the same colleagues that usually answer the phone, some additional training to deal with that digital contact, and we've seen that being really, really popular. And actually, it's opened up the amount of reporting that's coming to us for the public. So it's actually revealed that there was some sort of untapped demand that people are now willing to come to us with. So we're really grateful for that, because as I and the Deputy have said a couple of times this morning, we really need people to report to us, that lifeblood of intelligence. But it does mean there's a higher volume of reporting coming into us, and as a that there's a little bit more of a weight on the telephones. Now we want to get that back down. Hopefully the measures I've described will help in doing so. And of course, if you're interested in being at the very front line of policing and working in this area, then we are recruiting contact handlers. It's a really challenging job, but a very, very rewarding one if you want to come and see what it's like working with us here at our headquarters at Mount Brown.
That's great, Chief Constable, thank you. And I have recently welcomed a couple of the new intakes of contact handlers, and I have to say what's so encouraging about them is that we're seeing all ages, all backgrounds. They're coming from a really wide range of different occupations and backgrounds, and that's really, really good to see. So yes, they really, really are on the front line. I want to move on now to something that has come into us via the public.